Hey there, Gators. Welcome back for another lecture review. This one is on lifespan development, which is one of my favorite topics in the world. It's what my PhD is actually in, is lifespan development. So I really enjoyed this topic. I hope you all will enjoy it as well. We have a great deal of learning outcomes for this unit. So we are going, for this chapter, kind of going womb to tomb. So from conception to death. So it's a lot of ground to cover. But we're going to do it. It's going to be great. So we're going to hit on some of the most important aspects of human development. So to start us out, we got a great definition. So we're going to study how humans change and grow from conception through death. So people like myself, who are lifespan developmental psychologists, we truly study, so from conception all the way until the death process. So it's studying across the entire lifespan. And we study this development in many different domains. So we look at the physical development, cognitive, emotional, social, psychological, so we can look across how we develop across the lifespan and in multiple domains. So it's a very kind of complicated topic, super interesting, many different domains, many different skills and activities that are represented in lifespan development. We also ask some questions that are super important. So a lot of people are more interested in the kind of abnormal psychology. So people want to study things like, schizophrenia, or psychopathy. But what we really know from developmental psychology is that in order to understand if something is abnormal, we first have to understand what normal means. So what is normal emotional development? What is typical mental health or psychological state? In order to answer the questions of what is abnormal, then, we need this idea of what's normal. So that's what we'll focus on in lifespan development. We also try to understand if development is universal, so if you see this across cultures, across the world, or if it's really specific to one culture. So is it only one culture that does this activity, or is this activity or form of development represented throughout the entire world? We also look at development if it's continuous versus discontinuous. So with continuous, this might be just learning a little bit more each day. So maybe learning 1 or 2 new words as you're learning language each day. Discontinuous is more of a jump. So it's like a stage. So you might go from a lower level stage of learning language where maybe you know a few words, maybe 2 or 3, and then you jump up to the next stage. It's a big jump. It's discontinuous. So you have this big jump and then you know 50 words. So developmental psychologists are very interested then in this difference between continuous and discontinuous development. And the big one that goes all the way back to philosophy, nature versus nurture. So are we a product of what we come into the world with, our biology, our genes, or are we a product more of the environment and how this shapes us? So these are big theories, big questions within lifespan development. We'll talk about each of these stages of development. We spend more time in our lower, younger stages because more of our research in developmental psychology has been focused on these younger stages than it has in adulthood. We start with the conception. So we have a couple stages of conception to cover. Definitely read about each of these in your book to kind of understand how they differ. But the germinal stage, we've got weeks 1 through 2. So this really is when we have that egg and sperm merge. And this stage lasts then until the zygote is attached into the uterus. When the zygote implants into the uterus after the cell division process, then we say the embryonic stage has started. With the embryonic stage, we're implanted into the uterus and starts to form some of these big major structures. So this is when we start to see that life support system, which is the placenta. It'll start to form and attach in through the navel, the belly button. And then we see the neural tube, the spine and the brain, that rudimentary structures that will become the spine and the brain. They start to develop in those first couple weeks, so weeks 3 through 8. So very important development going on soon after implantation. But we spend most of our time in the womb in the fetal stage. So this is weeks 9 through 40, so it's the biggest, longest stage, and we start to see many different things happen as this stage occurs. So around 9 to 12 weeks, we start to have a differentiation of the sex organs. So we're kind of born, quote unquote, kind of typically female. So we are born, if we don't have testosterone, then we would be born, even if we were an XY male, we'd be born appearing as an XX female. But we would still be XY. So we're kind of naturally at a default state of female genitalia. That masculinizing influence of testosterone comes in, masculinizes the genitals, and that's where we start to see the formation of the penis and the testes. So around 9 to 12 weeks, the testosterone kicks in, and we start to see that formation of those sex organs. Around 16 weeks, we've got fingers and toes. 24 weeks, the baby can start to hear, the fetus can start to hear, and we also have a chance of survival to born around that time. So that chance of survival time is getting lower and lower. We're able to help more of these premature babies survive, but around 24 weeks, we start having that really good chance. Around 36 weeks, we're getting prepared for birth, so the baby's a little bit bigger, but they'll continue to put on brain development, growth, weight, and height as they continue in the womb. So you can watch this beautiful animation if you want to see more of the fetus growing in the womb. This is just kind of a brief overview of that. So we see conception through the fetal period, kind of illustrated here. There's a lot of influences that happen during the prenatal period that are really important. So we know that factors including genetics as well as the environment can impact development. A lot of people forget that the uterus is actually an environment. So the fetus is in an environment. They have environmental influences that whole time they're in the mother's uterus in the womb. So things that were really important during that in that early environment include prenatal care. So you want to get plenty of folic acid. That helps that neural tube to close fully and helps reduce the risk of spina bifida. Prenatal care can also help reduce complications, and we really, really want to avoid teratogens. So teratogens are anything that can really hurt that developing fetus or embryo. These are things like alcohol, drugs, certain types of viruses. So we want to avoid these to the best of our ability so that we don't have damage to that developing fetus. And depending on when the teratogen is introduced, that will influence what effects we see from that teratogen. So if you use cocaine in the early stages of pregnancy, then we might see, whatever is forming at that time is what's affected by the cocaine. If you use it during the later stages of pregnancy, then we're going to see, lower birth weight, things like that are happening at that time, at that later stages of pregnancy. So depending on when the teratogen is introduced and depending on the dose of that teratogen, that will influence the effects we actually see on the fetus. So now we have a baby that's born, it's an infant, a neonate. So what can a neonate do? We can't obviously ask them anything, but we can test many of their abilities and the things that they possess right at birth. So a big one we can test are reflexes. If we're able to test reflexes, we know that the baby's doing well. So this is kind of a representative of how their nervous system is functioning. But the rooting reflex, we see this kind of, if you rub the cheek, the baby will come on over there, like, something's over there, I want to eat. So they'll root. Sucking reflex, we'll suck if you put liquid on the lips. Grasping, you see the picture there, baby will grasp. The Moro reflex is a startle, so if you kind of drop the baby like this, they'll fling their arms out. Babinski is really cute, you stroke the toe and the toes will flail out. So you can watch the video to see some of these reflexes. And we're also able to see babies' senses right away. So vision is not well developed. They really prefer the human face. They'll track the human face. They don't see very well at birth, though. They also have hearing that really seems to be kind of zeroed in on that human voice, the human pitch. So they really prefer that. So it seems like they're wired to pay attention to caregivers, to their voice, to their sight. And then they can also smell pretty well. So this is a strong sense. They can smell mom's breast milk. So if you have breast pads that are soaked with mom's milk versus a stranger's milk and put them there on the infant's head, the baby will smell, they can turn towards mom's breast milk. They smell that difference in their mom. We see physical development, a lot of changes going on in those early years. So by 6 months, the neonate has tripled their weight, or doubled their weight. They've doubled their weight. By a year, they've tripled it. So 6 months, we double. By a year, we triple. And then by 2 years, we quadruple that birth weight. So if you were born at 6 pounds, then by 6 months, we would double that up to 12. A year, we would triple it. And then 2 years, quadruple. So if you imagine doing that now as a grown-up, you'd be in the hospital. It'd be super horrible, medical mystery kind of thing. But this is very common then for our little guys. Around 4 to 6 years, though, growth will slow. So that seems to be a pretty common thing that, kids will stop having this massive rate of development. And then around 8 to 9 years, we see our girls being a little bit bigger than our boys, which continues until early puberty. We also see brain development happening rapidly in these first years of life. So we're born with many neurons. They make these amazing connections in the first couple years of life. Whatever connections we don't seem to need, then those are pruned away, so they're reduced. But the brain won't be fully developed until our early to mid-20s. So it still takes quite a while for our brain to fully develop. But a lot of brain development is happening in those first few years. A lot of brain development. We also see a lot of new motor skills. So we move past those reflexes. We're able to hold our head up, to crawl, to walk. And then we see that these milestones, that infants will hit milestones. So we'll be able to say, you know, at a certain point at 5 years, kids should be able to do X, Y, and Z. And those are the milestones that we expect all typically developing babies to hit. We also see that development can go from the head down. So we see kind of development starting with the head and moving down into the extremities. So we call that cephalocaudal. And then the proximodistal growth is coming from the center of the body back out to the extremities. So that means, you know, our shoulders are developing before our fingertips are developing. So development kind of works that way with our motor development. There's a developmental chart here that kind of shows milestones. The CDC also publishes really good developmental charts that'll show you by what time babies should be developing each skill. So that's a great place to go if you want to look at your own kids and see how they're developing. We also know that infants are not all the same at birth. And so we often seem to think, you know, before we have exposure to small children, that we just get this blank slate baby and they have no personality and nothing going on, and then we shape them. But that's not always the case. So we have a lot of research that suggests that babies have temperaments. They have this kind of biological predisposition that they come into the world with. These distinctions, the classic ones, are babies that fall into these categories. So many babies would just be average. They don't fall well into any of these categories. But some babies are super easy. So no matter what you do, you know, they just kind of hang out, they stare at you, they're interested, they're really chill. Those are easy babies. Slow to warm up babies, you got to give them a little bit of time. So you might bring them into a new situation, they're wary, they're a little nervous, they're not super excited about it, but then they warm up and they're pretty excited, pretty happy, you know, pretty comfortable there. The difficult babies, these kids, kind of no matter what you do, they're a little bit upset. So, you know, they're hot, they're cold, someone's looking at them wrong, their clothes don't fit, for some reason they just don't like what they're doing, they don't like the way you're looking at them, like they're just difficult. So they might cry more than other babies, be more negative in their emotionality. So we can see these differences in babies, you know, practically as soon as we bring them home. We can also see this distinction between babies that are highly reactive and low reactive. So our highly reactive babies, you know, these babies are just super reactive to any stimulus. So if it's cold, they're reactive. If you look at them funny, if you blow on their face, if you have a loud noise, they're just really reactive. Our low reactive babies are much more calm, so they're not as reactive to the environment around them. You know, much more of this calm type of baby. This brings us into our cognitive development. For cognitive development, we need to start with Piaget. So if you have any interest in being like an education major or anything like that, you will definitely talk about Piaget. But Piaget was a theorist who saw kids as little scientists, and he thought they went through these processes of assimilation and accommodation that helped them move into these distinct cognitive stages. So with assimilation, we're able to bring in new knowledge and just kind of incorporate that into what we already know. So we know that there's a thing called orange carrots, but we also have purple carrots. So you can just kind of easily assimilate that into your knowledge of carrots and say some carrots are orange, some carrots are purple. But accommodation is when you really can't make that fit easily. So if you go into Whole Foods, they might have, you know, 6 different types of carrots and things closely related to carrots and things you've never seen. And so for that, you really need to broaden your whole category of carrots. They don't easily fit in there. Now you have this whole new thing that you've never seen before. So we have to go with accommodation at that point. So he thought that this process of assimilation and accommodation kind of worked in tandem, but if we have to accommodate too much, that means that our processes are just not right. We're not able to think about the world the way we need to, so we would make a big jump to a new stage. We've got Piaget's stages listed here. Let's see if I can get these up for us. There we go. So you're able to see these stages, and they start at the bottom with our sensory motor. So this is our 0 to 2-year-olds. One big hallmark of these young guys is object permanence. So that ability to know that an object exists even if it's not in our sight. I've got a video linked for that one. The pre-operational stage, kids really kind of have difficulty understanding things from others' perspectives. So you can watch the egocentrism mountain task linked in there. Our concrete operational kids are getting bigger, so ages 7 to 12. They're able to think a lot more about other people's perspectives. They can understand things logically, but they really struggle with abstract thought. It's not until we get into formal operations, the top of the stair step, around ages 12 plus, that we can really think in a formal, abstract, hypothetical term. So Vygotsky was another person who looked at our cognitive development. So he thought that the development was an apprenticeship between a child and someone who knows better, who knows more. So he thought that these adults who knew more, or these children who are larger, bigger, who know more, that they help kids learn they scaffold their development. So they give them just enough assistance to get where they need to be. And he thought that they did this within their zone of proximal development. So you'll see this picture here of the zone of proximal development, and that kind of shows we all can do certain things. So that's the green circle. We can do other things if somebody just helps us a little bit. That's the purple circle. And then the blue circle is things we're just really not capable of at this point. So I think of my kid who wants to start cooking. She's 8 years old. So there's certain things she can do that are really easy for her, like make pudding. You just stir milk and pudding mix. There are things that she really can't do at this point, like make a creme brulee or a really complicated scone. She's just not ready for that. But there's a lot of stuff in that purple rain that what I can do with help, where if I give her help, she can do it. So we might be able to make brownies out of just from scratch. We might be able to do that. So if I help her, she's capable of doing that. So that's in her zone of proximal development. But I want to be sure not to give her too much assistance. I don't want to bake the brownies myself. I want to instead scaffold her to give her just enough assistance so she can make those brownies. So that's kind of what Vygotsky said about our development. Language is really, really interesting. So we know that language is, we're kind of biologically predisposed to understand languages. So babies are actually universal listeners. They can hear little chunks of language that we as adults cannot hear. So we lose that ability. But this really seems like no matter what language we're exposed to, what culture we're exposed to, we seem predisposed to pick up then these language milestones. Many adults will automatically speak to a baby in parentese. It helps them learn the language. This isn't things like goo goo gaga, that's not parentese. What it is instead is kind of pitching your tone a little higher, speaking a little slower. So like, oh, this is a beautiful baby. I love the baby. The baby is so sweet. So you're using real words, but you're just, moving your voice around more. So a lot of us just automatically speak in parentese to young babies. We can also see a real pattern in our language development. So we move from simple gestures into cooing, which is more of that vowel sound, ooh. Babbling has more of that consonant vowel combo, ma, 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 ma. And then we get into words, kind of adding more words to our vocabulary, where around 3 years, then we would have ability to speak in sentences. So it goes, within those first few years of life, it really goes from simple gestures to speaking in sentences. It's pretty amazing, and we see this cross-culturally. Another big theory in development that starts very young and has implications across the lifespan is attachment. So attachment is our first connection, our first bond with other people, and it really promotes survival. So we need our caregivers to stay with us. We need them to like us. We need them to worry about us and stay with us. So being able to kind of meet their needs, meet our caregivers' needs, promotes our survival. We saw the earliest work here with Harlow's monkeys. There's a video linked in that you can watch there. But Harlow had monkeys. He took them away from their parents, and then he gave them a cloth mother that didn't provide any food. It was just soft, and gave them a wire monkey mother that fed them food. And so he was interested in wondering whether or not these monkeys would bond to the food, the person or the monkey, the fake parent who gave them food, or would bond to the one that gave them comfort. And he found consistently that babies would go to the wire monkey, drink the food, and immediately move over and cuddle that comfort monkey. So it kind of shows us we need that bond, that connection, that cuddling. It's not just about food. And so people have now moved to this idea of attachment into young children. So with this strange situation that you can watch here, they'll have a mom and a baby come in a lab. The mom will exit, and then the mom will return. And they'll see what the baby does. So many babies are secure, so mom exits, they might be a little bit upset, she comes back, they calm down. Other babies are what we call insecure. So our avoidant babies, the mom leaves, they may or may not be upset, mom returns, they kind of ignore her. So they've learned, I need to keep my emotions to myself, I don't want to display a lot of emotion. Our resistant babies are, very upset when mom leaves, very upset when mom returns. They can't calm down, they need mom, they're preoccupied with mom, and they can't regulate their emotions well. And then our disorganized babies are just confused. So we see all kinds of different confused reactions. They're really just not sure what to do. Self-concept, so this is something that also develops as we grow. So it's an understanding of who we are. Young babies don't show a self-concept. It really ends up being more around 18 months when we're able to see toddlers start to recognize themselves. So we put a little bit of makeup on their forehead and show them a mirror. And if they don't recognize themselves, many times they'll go and try to touch the mirror. They'll look behind the mirror to see if anybody's back there. They don't recognize that that's themselves. But around 18 months, they start to point to their own head, point to that lipstick on their head, and they realize that that's them. As we get a little bit older, we can start to name ourselves, point to ourselves in pictures, understand that that's us. And 2 to 4 years, we really start to have better increases in social behavior, though we still have difficulty with sharing with others. That takes time. Another aspect of development is gender development. So we know sex and gender are different. We talked about this in the previous chapter. But sex is that category. Gender is more of what psychologically or culturally we ascribe to the category. Gender roles are expectations, stereotypes, attitudes that we have regarding what it means to be a certain gender. And then gender identity is our psychological sense of being male or female. So what we feel like we are in our psyche, in our head. Are we male? Are we female? So we see kids kind of move through patterns with gender role development. So around 2 to 3, they recognize themselves as a specific gender. 3 years, they really start to have a preference for gender-specific toys and same-sex friends. So we see this kind of differences in our gender role development, and we start to see trends in kids as they kind of pick this stuff up. This brings us into parenting styles. So I think parenting styles are really interesting. We've all had the experience of being parented, so you can kind of see where your own parents fall into this. So developmental psychologists recognize authoritative parenting as the optimal form of parenting. So this is parents that have high demands, high expectations, but are also highly warm and highly responsive. So you need to do your homework, you need to do it now, but I love you, kid, and it's important to me because I want you to succeed. So high demands, high responsiveness. Many parents will fall into the category where they give high demands. They say you need to do your homework, you need to do it now, but they're low in that responsiveness. So they're just do it. You know, it's not that, oh, well, I love you because you need to do this, because it's just more do it now, do as I say. And that's more of the authoritarian parenting style. Permissive parents, they're really warm and loving, but they don't put demands on their kids, kind of like friends. And then the uninvolved parents aren't really warm and they don't put demands on there. So they're just kind of almost more neglectful in nature. They really don't, interact with the kid very much. They don't have a lot of demands. They don't have a lot of warmth or comfort for those kids. So it seems like authoritative parenting, the first one we covered, high demands, high responsiveness is the best style, but culture matters. So it's not the same in every culture that authoritative parenting is ideal. So we can see cultures where authoritarian parenting becomes more ideal in that culture. This will bring us into some of our additional stages. So we've talked about Piaget stages, but we have a few more stage theorists to talk about. We'll start here with Freud. So Freud believed that really those first early experiences we have are what influences our personality as we develop. And he thought we worked through stages. So we've got his stages here. These are stages that are based in psychosexual stages, psychosexual development. So he said we started with the oral stage, then moved into the anal, phallic, latency, and genital. And kind of read on this graphic some of the most important aspects of each of those stages. But he thought that as we move through these stages, if we didn't get what we needed, like in the oral stage, if we didn't get that oral development, then we would get fixated in that stage, and we would be someone who bites our fingers or who smokes cigarettes or what have you, that they're constantly getting oral input. We also see with this phallic stage that there's a link there for Oedipus and Electra complex. These are complexes that Freud believed that during this stage of 3 to 7, we start to have sexual feelings towards our opposite sex parent. So a little boy would have sexual feelings towards his mother and then would resent his father as being competition. And so, he thought that this happened in all of our sexual development. So Freud is a very controversial person, but these were his stages of how he thought we moved through, psychosexually. Erikson is a theory that we do kind of more closely align with, and this is the psychosocial theory. So instead of psychosexual, psychosocial. Erikson believed that development took place throughout the whole lifespan and that we have specific conflicts that we need to resolve at each stage to move along successfully. So you can read more about each of these conflicts in your text, but we start with trust versus mistrust. So an infant has to learn a balance between trusting others and having a healthy sense of mistrust of others. And we keep moving through these. We go all the way to older adulthood, where we have to learn to feel good about our life, to feel like we've lived a good life, we have integrity, versus feeling like we've made a lot of mistakes and we're upset with the life we've lived, and that leads to despair. So we really want to be able to kind of negotiate these conflicts, negotiate these tasks, and solve and then receive our virtue from being able to solve that. Moral development, we won't spend too long here, but this was moral development is an important aspect of growing. Kohlberg believed that this followed a series of stages, which we'll look at. He asked people a dilemma that you can read here, or experience here, the Heinz dilemma. So it was just kind of asking people if, if their wife was really sick and they needed to get some medication and the pharmacist wouldn't give it to them, what would they do? Was kind of the basis of this moral dilemma. So we're able to look at some of his stages here in a second. But we also have other theorists that look at moral development. Carol Gilligan had a theory based in care and in responsibility, and because Kohlberg, we think more was based in this idea of justice. But we'll look here real quick at Kohlberg's stages. You're able to kind of read through this chart. But the level 1, 2, and 3 kind of said we start at this earliest level, the pre-conventional morality, working mostly on obedience and punishment. Then most of us kind of stop at this conventional morality, so we're worried about authority or about our interpersonal connections. Some of us will advance into this post-conventional morality, and that's where we're driven more by things like universal ethics of right and wrong, moral principles. This brings us into adolescence. So for our adolescence, we see physical development being a big hallmark of adolescence. We experience puberty, which is when we hit sexual maturity. At this time, we're having maturing of our glands, and we're starting to see primary and secondary sexual characteristics mature. So the primary are those that are related to reproduction. Secondary are not directly related to reproduction. We also see girls experience their first menstrual period, which we call menarche. And so this happens around 12 and a half on average, even though that age has been going down. And then we also see boys experience spermarche, so this production of the first sperm and first spontaneous ejaculation. Timing of puberty has differences for psychological development. So early maturing boys often report that they enjoy being early maturing, but it can lead them to risk factors for increased use of drugs, alcohol, and early sexual activity. Early maturing girls often do not want to be the first to mature. They often report psychological distress at being one of the earliest matured girls, so it can lead them to be more self-conscious, have experiences with depression or substance abuse. Late blooming boys and girls, so some girls may feel conscious about their lack of physical development. Some girls actually enjoy being late blooming, but boys especially do not seem to enjoy being late blooming. It can lead them to risk for psychological disorders as well, like depression. The teenage brain is still really under development, so during adolescence we are not fully developed in our brain, but we are fully developed in our limbic system, so that pleasure system, kind of feeling, those good feelings. So that's why we see kids taking risks. It's not that they don't understand that, some things can be risky. It's just that it feels so much better to them, and they don't have that fully developed cognitive control, that executive functioning to stop themselves from doing certain activities. In adolescence, we really see peers become super, super important. They're the central focus. If we have healthy relationships with parents, this is a great thing for teens. And really many teens will continue to be much like they were before. So we have this myth that adolescence is a period of, total storm and stress and, anxiety and problems. And for many teens, this isn't the case. For many teens, we see continuity. So if they already had, decent school grades, healthy relationships with peers and with parents, in many cases that will continue throughout adolescence. Emerging adulthood is a newer kind of category of development. So we think this occurs from maybe 18 through mid-20s or so. And kind of thinking about what makes someone an adult. When does a person become an adult? What things do we actually do to become an adult? And for many of us, this is not an easy question to answer. So we might say you're an adult at age 18 because that's when you're legally an adult, but many people would not identify yet as an adult at age 18. So it's a very complicated issue. And it's taking emerging adults a lot longer to grow up because of many, many societal issues. So, work, we require more college degrees, we require more education for work, going to school, time to explore your options, explore opportunities to date other people, to live in different places. So for many individuals, this period of emerging adulthood is a broader time of exploration than it has been in our historical past. This slide just gives a lot of information about specific things with adulthood. I think it's kind of sad as we read through that it starts getting, we'll see in middle adulthood, it talks about just mostly physical decline. There are other important things that happen, though, in middle and late adulthood. But in early adulthood, we seem to be at our physical peak. Many people will have children at this stage. Middle adulthood, we start to see gradual physical decline. Late adulthood, we see more physical decline, and we can start to see some issues with cognitive decline as well. In our midlife, we don't have as much research about the midlife period in developmental psychology, but we know that most people do not experience a midlife crisis. Instead, they might just kind of correct their course, try to achieve some goals that they've missed previously. Adults may experience empty nest syndrome, so when their children leave the nest, they have this time of figuring out who they are, what their relationship is without kids in the home. And we may see people experience menopause. This would be for women, so that kind of cessation of reproductive capacity, no longer able to get pregnant, their menstrual periods stop. This isn't the case for men exactly, so we do have a term for that, andropause, but many men will not have this period of time where they're just suddenly unable to birth young, so many men can continue to achieve a pregnancy with a partner throughout their lifespan. So we don't have that kind of immediate stopping for men. Our cognitive abilities in adulthood, we think of this kind of categorized in two different categories. So our crystallized intelligence is more of what we know, that information, those skills, it's kind of like that Jeopardy knowledge that really seems to hold steady. Where we start to see declines is in more of our fluid intelligence, so that information processing ability, our reasoning, our memory. But it really can help if we can become active, stay active, both mentally and physically. We really start to see benefits for our cognitive abilities if we're staying active. And we really see this as well in the idea of healthy aging. So with healthy aging, it's this idea that we're still engaging in exercise, and we're getting a good diet, we're interacting with other people, we have positive relationships. All of these things really contribute to this idea of aging well, of living a healthy older adulthood. And our last topic is death and dying. So we know that death really is a natural part of life. We're all going to achieve this part of our life. We're all going to die. There's many times when we think of death, we think of people dying in the hospital as old age, but there are other options. So one of these options is hospice care. With this, we see more of a palliative care perspective. So people might go home and prepare for their death at their home. They have people come in and help them to experience death with dignity. So they might provide medication to help reduce pain, help the family as the person transitions to death. So it can be a different option for how one might wish to die. The stages of grief is a really common perspective on how we die and how we cope with death, but not everyone will go through these stages in the same way. So some people may go from anger to depression to denial and then to acceptance. Some people may skip some of the negative feelings, go straight to acceptance of their death. So it's not exactly that everyone will experience this in the same way, but it does give us some ideas of how this grief process can take a long time for those who are remaining after the death, and it can be a lengthy experience. But we will all get there one day. Well, thank you so much, Gators. I hope that you all have a wonderful week.